But rugby is also a global game. That's the thing we shouldn't beat ourselves up about. Like, we've got some really cool stuff happening in rugby. We're a bit quick to kind of focus on the negative when there's so much stuff to celebrate as well.
Well, Martin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and we've been looking forward to chatting with you. You've been leading the URC United Rugby Championship for a number of years now, through to become one of the most competitive leagues in the world, and the transition of bringing in the South African teams as well. It's been quite a journey. Would you be able to give us a quick introduction to yourself and what your rugby journey has been and how you got into the sport for those that...
Sure. Yeah, thanks very much, by the way. Thanks for asking me on. My rugby journey, so I played rugby. I played in the championship, mainly, or national one as it was back then, championship latterly. Played for Leeds Tykes, played for Otley, London Welsh. And I was sort of in academies for London Irish and played a few games there. So sort of a burgeoning rugby player, and then realised wasn't good enough, really. So I pivot towards the kind of business side of it, and I became a lawyer, and then worked for a big agency called IMG, and through that became a lawyer for Rugby World Cup, and then that was sort of the roundabout journey to 10 years ago. Got offered a job as MD of what was then the Pro 12. Celtic League of old was the Pro 12 at that point. We created the Pro 14 and it became the URC. So it's been a 10-year journey from that point to now. But I've been brought up on rugby from day dot. Yeah, so I love it. I'm a big fan of it. My kids, I've got 3 boys, obsessed with it. So it's in our blood somewhere, for sure.
What would you say was the main motivation behind you wanting to pursue a career in rugby?
It was probably a career in sport, if I'm honest, rather than rugby. I think rugby, I came to having played it, and then an opportunity arose in rugby. I don't think I was looking for a role in rugby, actually. I had moved from being kind of straight lawyer at IMG to actually working in the motorsport division, so completely different. I was managing Formula One drivers. I was doing stuff that was basically any sport that IMG put in front of me, I'd sort of try my hand at. It was an amazing place at that point. I had a huge athlete roster from Tiger Woods, the Williams sisters, you name it. They sort of had been around IMG or involved with IMG at some stage in their career, largely. Including Nadal, Federer, and everybody really. So rugby wasn't the thing I was focused in on, really. It was sport, it was management in sport, business for sport, and I sort of had an opportunity with the Pro 12, so couldn't turn it down. Yeah.
Sounds absolutely amazing. Yeah. So it sounds like you've always been a rugby fan though throughout your life. So what club did you kind of grow up supporting?
I think I'm a really good case study because it was London Irish. My mum's Irish. I ended up being in the London Irish Academy, but it was the one I sort of felt most connected to through my mum. So London Irish. So it's why it's a big, hopefully it's nothing to do with me, by the way, but 3 of my clubs have all gone bust with London Welsh, London Irish, and Leeds. So, it shows that the game is relatively new professionally and has gone through a bunch of growing pains, and 3 of my previous clubs have gone bust as a result. So, so London Irish. So it was a real pain and a real, heartache to see them go under when they did.
Having worked in other sports, like motocross, you mentioned tennis, and you see these clubs going under, what do you think needs to be done to maybe prevent that from happening?
It's interesting because I guess I'm a student of sport as well and business. I'm very, very interested in how sports develop around the world. And if you look at the NFL, for example, the NFL you sort of born in the sort of 1920s, really. It was a bit before that, but went through a bunch of growing pains. They lost so many clubs up to the 60s and 70s. Then they merged with the other league, AFL, at that point to create a kind of joint NFL. So, growing pains in sport is not only a rugby problem in professional sport. It's everywhere. I mean, any sport that goes through professionalisation creates those who win and those that lose, literally off the field and on the field. I think the issue that we've got in rugby specifically is the costs of the sport, the players largely, has outstripped the commercial return that a league can generate, and that's true for every league in the world. We don't generate anywhere near enough money at the league level to pay the salaries of the players at the club level, if you know what I mean. Whereas in NFL, NBA, etc., they pay more from their central distribution than the teams spend on their players. So they're inherently more valuable, and that's because the league can generate that money. It's linked to the players, what the players are earning. There's no correlation between what we earn to what the players earn. And it's that sort of outer kilter business model that's created the problems with those clubs that I mentioned going bust.
Do you think the structure of the URC or some of the other leagues is set up in a way for success similar to NFL?
We have, I suppose, the benefit, and we saw this with Cardiff last year, where our ownership is the unions of our territories. So in that case, the WRU, the Welsh Rugby Union, stepped in and made sure that Cardiff didn't go under. They went to administration, which meant that the owners at that point failed to pay. The WRU stepped in. So they, if you like, protected the employees of that business, and then they protected us as a league, that Cardiff continued to be playing in our competition. So we have a kind of safety net that maybe private ownership leagues like Prem didn't have at that point. I think in the case of, say, the NRL Rugby League in Australia, when they were going through some challenging times in the sort of noughties, tens, the NRL would have stepped in and run those clubs until such point as a buyer can be found. That didn't happen in England, right? So that's probably the main difference. The NFL just sort of doesn't get itself in that position largely, but if it did, it would do that. It would step in and run those clubs, then sell them. And that's the bit we are probably most like the American sports. Our unions step in and make sure they're run properly. Stormers in the first year when they won URC were actually in administration technically. And the South African Rugby Union had stepped in, they were running them, and they won our league. So you can show that sort of continuity that you get of certain ownership groups makes it easier for someone like me to run a league, because I'm not then worried that that club isn't going to be there by the end of the season. And that's the bit that they didn't have, as I say, in Prem.
Wow, that's amazing. So, I mean, you've been involved with the URC since 2015. It was Pro 12, Pro 14, and then the URC. What was kind of the motivation behind the addition of the South African teams?
Yeah, I suppose we were always, I actually remember, I think it might have been 2006, 2009, so before I joined, they had talked about the Rainbow Cup, the Rainbow League at that point. It was always, were the South African teams actually better off in Northern Hemisphere competition because of the time zone? They'd been in Super Rugby from the beginning of professional rugby, which was around 95, 96, I think. So they're playing against New Zealand, Australia, and latterly against Japan and the Jaguares in Argentina. But that is a huge amount of time zones, right, for South Africa. Whereas we're like a 1 or 2 hour time zone out, like it's an overnight flight. So for quite a long time, people thought actually, well, the South African team's better off in European competitions purely from that time zone perspective, because traveling to Australia and then back to Buenos Aires and then up to Singapore to play the Sunwolves at the time, that was a long old travel. Whereas in our league, they do one trip and they play everybody and move back. And, you know, we do the same. We play 2 times when we go out there, and it's relatively straightforward. So yeah, that was the sort of genesis of it, that we knew that it was possible. And then we had the Cheetahs and the Kings came in, and that was a bit of a sort of trial and test situation. In South African rugby, they have, I think it's 14 provincial unions, but only 6 are sort of funded well enough to play in international competition. 4 at that point were in Super Rugby, and we had the 2 other ones who had left Super Rugby. Then COVID hit, and the 4 big big players, the ones we have now, became available, and we just jumped at that. And we sort of we set it up for success, but there was a whole bunch of luck in there too. Dare I say it, for something so horrible as COVID. But COVID created an opportunity for us to move into URC, and it's been really successful since.
I mean, among chaos comes opportunity, the yin and yang.
Yeah, it is really. Yeah, and I think where everybody at that point was saying, how do we build back better? How do you create something that's more sustainable going forward? More sustainable for them, more sustainable for us. And then this summer, after a 4-year period, they became a shareholder. So it was a sort of culmination of 7-8 years of work to get them to the point where they actually now are a full shareholder of our league. Yeah, so they are treated exactly the same way as the other unions.
What commercial impact has this inclusion of the South African teams had on the league?
It's significant. Yeah, it went. It's gone up by 70% in 1 year. It is now our largest market. So it makes up our largest single market. Sorry, I'm touching my microphone. And so that is pretty significant to us, obviously, to any business. But for 4 teams out of 16, they more than punched their weight. They've been successful. They contested the first 3 finals, first 4 finals. All finals. They have the first 3 down in South Africa. And they've really contributed from fandom, etc., attendance. A bit hit and miss on attendance because they're very large stadiums. But the likes of Stormers have the highest average attendance. So whilst they've got a big stadium, 60,000, I think their average is up at 25,000 a game. So it's pretty significant.
Is that 70% increase on revenue?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's massive.
It's a big step, yeah. And for a competition like us, where we would and still are probably the smallest of the 3 big leagues in the world, with us, Prem and the LNR in the top 14, we've caught up. We've caught up to the Prem, at least. Bit of a way to go to the French, but that's quite significant. We've had probably a 3-time turnover from when I started to now. And that's what you need. You need to put a load more money into the system to fund that player cost that I was talking about largely. But we want them also not to just spend money on players, the clubs. We want to invest in fan experience. We want the development of our stadiums. We need our whole experience of going to a rugby game, a club rugby game, to be much better than it has been traditionally. And we'll see that. So you'll see that in Connacht. They're building a new stand, new stadium, really. And we're trying to make sure that each one of our clubs, and we help them do this, try and improve their fan experience so that you're not just going to an international game expecting one level and then you go to a club game and get completely another. It may well be different, and it's sort of more open and more, I guess, communal at a club game maybe than an international game. It's more welcoming and open, and that's our positioning. That's how we might win at the club level. I think what's interesting about us is we're owned by unions, so we don't just look at the club game in isolation. We look at it as the full pyramid. We are there to, in addition to creating an amazing league, also create a pathway to get players from out of school into an academy through the franchise team, for want of a better word, and into that international game. And I think we do that really well. Right? We've got a very, very good graduation process to the top level, and you're seeing that with the Irish team, probably most notably, but you're also seeing it in Scotland. And we need to see it in Wales more often.
We do. I'm sure we will.
Yeah, we will.
I'm sure
we will.
And Martin, what's been the biggest challenge? I mean, with cross-hemisphere logistics, what have you found the biggest challenges to be?
That is it. I mean, it's basically they're very large human beings being moved up and down, and and it's such things as looks silly really, but it's the amount of capacity on these routes. There are very limited capacity at business class, so you end up moving people over 2 flights rather than 1. It's quite, you're in the weeds there, but it's important weeds because you need players to be in the right condition when they get up to Europe if they come from South Africa and vice versa. The tour down is a little bit easier, I think, for our teams because they only do it once a season. When I say our teams, I must stop using that language, but the European team. Because they only do it once a season and they do it for a two game trip. So it's a real known thing up front. They really enjoy it. It's like a It's a little bit like a tour of old for these players. The South Africans, it's a bit harder because they're doing multiple tours, but compared to what they're doing in Super Rugby, it's a lot less. So it's about getting the kind of mode, the class of travel right for a bigger group. That's now the aim, and that's a kind of money thing, right? It's a straight up money thing. It's 40% more costly now, the same route that it was when they joined.
The airlines must love you guys.
That's why we've got an airline deal. Yeah, yeah, they do. Yeah, right, quite right. They need to love us a bit more. No, I think that is really where these deals come from. Right, we are actually business back genuinely to the Qatar Airways guys. We are great business for them. We're kind of recurring business. There's a lot of scale, and not just us as URC, but our unions as well. Our unions are moving a lot of people around the world. The game's global, right? So unfortunately, there's a little bit of concern around that. Certainly now, and we've got to make sure we do it in the most sustainable way possible. We do it in the right way. We do it as little as possible, really. And when we do move people around, we move them in a way that makes sure that we look after their welfare.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it there. Globally, rugby leagues are competing for revenue and attention. What would you say is the URC's commercial edge when it compared to, let's say, the Prem or the top 14?
It's interesting because you would assume that we're competitors with one another, but we sit here in London with Prem. We are owned in part, at least, by a private equity firm, ourselves and Prem and Six Nations, called CVC Capital Partners. So we're sort of friends as opposed to competitors. And we do quite a lot together because we co-own the EPCR, which is the Champions Cup and the Challenge Cup. So our products are very different, aren't they? Like, we're not in England, they're not in the rest of the UK, they're not in South Africa, they're not in Ireland, not in Italy. I guess we sell ourselves more on that cross-border franchise. There's no promotion relegation. We've got 312 to 15 at any given time international players playing in our league. That's sort of our sales pitch, so to speak. And we don't seem to go up against them that often commercially.
Could we ever see a champion of the URC versus champion of Prem match?
Possibly, yeah. I think that would be something. That would be fun. Yeah, we've actually had. Not that we actually organised it or arranged it, but it was the Super Rugby champion versus URC champion. It was Munster Crusaders. And they sold out Parky Queeve, which is the GAA ground in Cork, 42,000 easily. So there's something in that, like winner versus winner of the leagues. What happens though tends to be is you run out of weekends. Yeah. Every single club weekend is designated. And if it's not a club weekend, it's an international weekend. There's not weekends to play with. Tends to be the problem, but the idea is good, isn't it? I think we'd all like to see that. Yeah,
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, same. And it might be that we try and do it pre-season, like a FA Cup, Charity Cup type, Charity Shield, as it was.
And Martin, how do you balance traditional fans with trying to attract those newer, younger fans?
Yeah, I'm big on bringing new fans in. I think traditional fans will come. I think you can see that we've got a really good hardcore of fans. We're kind of keen to trial things and test things, and we've done that when we first launched URC. We had a partnership with Rock Nation, and when you change things, if you change it too quickly, it can have sort of counterproductive effect of putting people off who are already there. I think we've got to try and walk that line of doing things differently enough where you're bringing new people in and they feel comfortable and welcome without putting the people off who've put their money down time and time again to come back again. I think with that deal, perhaps with some of the music we were playing and things like that, the feedback is it's just gone you move too quickly. What's interesting is, like, in every market is different. And in every market, there's a little nuance that, we can't do one cookie cutter approach from a marketing perspective across the URC. It has to be done specifically to South Africa, to Italy, to Wales, to Scotland, Ireland. They're all different. The main thing is just being open, accessible. That's around kickoff times and things like that. There's a lot of work gone into making sure that we're not just Friday night clubs, if they're traditionally Friday night. there's enough Saturdays that you can introduce new fans. Trying to create products on social that are a little bit more, which you're involved in, which are a little bit more accessible to a wider audience, not just kind of rugby hardcore audience. Things like that. I think there's more stuff we can do. I've been on record saying we need a sort of more intuitive computer game, because I think that was the way I got into American sports. Actually, I never played American football, but I was obsessed with Madden on the Mega Drive as it was, or whatever the console was at the time. And that was my way into American football. And now my kids are getting into American football. But the genesis of that was me playing a computer game. And I think in a contact sport, we're going to need that more in rugby. We're going to need to invest in that more. There is a computer game, don't get me wrong, but it's quite a sort of aficionado approach, where if you look at the NFL now, Madden's become that aficionado product.
Yeah.
But they've got two other products that are much more intuitive, basically your vertical screen on your phone. And that's about getting new fans into watching and understanding who the NFL teams are and so on and so forth. Rugby can learn a lot from that. Rugby can learn a lot from actually traditional playing card games. There's no rugby card games out there, is there? When you go into a petrol station, you'll see Formula One, you'll see cricket, you'll see football 4 times over. And rugby's not in that space, so how do you expect kids to talk about it in the playground, right? So there's some relatively easy wins if we coordinate better than we've coordinated before.
Yeah.
But it's a bunch of things. We're launching a Roblox game, for example, to try and address some of that. But yeah, the more people we can get into the ground, the better. I mean, that's what the game needs. We're not particularly discerning about who that is. We've got a kids round. We want more kids to come to the game. Yeah. We've got a unity round. We want it to be totally inclusive. You want to come to a ground, you've got to feel completely safe. You're not going to hear stuff in a rugby ground, I hope, that you might hear in other sports. We want everybody to feel welcome to a club rugby game.
I think as a league, you guys are really, leading by example with how you're bridging that. I mean, with a series like Send It, it really is showing us that kind of behind the scenes, get to know the players, get to know the personalities behind a lot of the brands we see out there associated with rugby. So I know I've personally loved it, and I think a lot of the feedback online has been very similar.
Yeah, I've seen that actually. The way in, I think, if you guys have ever seen Overtime or not, but it's US sports, mainly basketball. It's young people talking about young people, and that's what we should have with Send It. It's young people talking about relatively young rugby players. Way more interesting to my kids who are 10, 8 than a 40, 50-year-old talking about, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. There's a certain market for that.
There's different target markets out there. Yeah.
Get the people to communicate with the people that you're trying to communicate to, largely.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that's been really interesting on the platform as well. And that's the other thing, is we were too sort of niche about what platforms we operated on, and we've got to be completely agnostic to that. And that's why we should be across every single social media platform. We should, this phrase is used way too much, but fish where the fish are. And that takes a lot of resource, actually, doesn't it? Or you do something like Send It, or you create a creator network, which we've done, where we ask the wider ecosystem to support that and be involved in it. And that has sort of organic growth built into it, which I quite like. You can see, again, people like yourselves taking a role to grow something, and that's mutually beneficial for everybody. So I like that. I like the organic kind of nature of it. It's not contrived. It's sort of, you set it up to succeed, and then you kind of step back and let it grow.
I mean, you guys launched the URC Go program, which involved a lot of creators as well.
Yeah. We had to, and we still do. There's a traditional, largely linear broadcast restriction framework. You're always trying to make sure you're not crossing over. The creator network, I think, has done an amazing job to create content. We've helped, obviously, we've facilitated. The main thing we need to keep on doing is showing the broadcasters, usually paid broadcasters, this isn't a threat to you. In fact, this is exactly what you should be doing. And we are helping you do that because we're creating top of funnel awareness. So it's not taking away from your subscription or whoever's going to subscribe to your broadcast, whether it's Premier Sports or Supersport in South Africa or Sky Sports in Italy. This is actually going to help. We're going to grow the top of funnel. You're going to get more people subscribing overall when they're ready to subscribe. And that means that if there's a fandom in any sport, there's going to be a whole bunch of people, usually younger people, who aren't ready to subscribe yet. But at some point they will be. And I think that is where the NBA have been for years. And it wasn't until this TV cycle, I think they quadrupled their earnings from broadcast because that audience they've been talking to largely on social or on YouTube or wherever it had been, and their amazing sort of integration of vertical content on their app was aimed at a whole bunch of people who then suddenly became of the age where they subscribed for something. And that's when it kind of makes sense from a broadcast perspective. And that is, American sports are so good at looking into the future. And maybe they've done that because they've earned a lot of money on their previous contracts and they can kind of fund it and grow it. But we have to learn from American sports, like creating a content series or creator series doesn't in any way affect your broadcast subscriptions. If anything, it helps. And we're still kind of trying to win that argument sometimes with the broadcasters.
Yeah, I mean, the NBA, the NFL, they've done a great job of integrating other people, fans of the sport, to then create content that drives engagement to their league. So
yeah, it's socially relevant.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that's the thing that rugby still needs to try to be. In certain markets, we are socially relevant. I think South Africa is a really good example where it is very pervasive in South Africa rugby. And therefore, it's quite cool, if you know what I mean. Whereas sometimes it's not necessarily as a cool sport here. It's not as culturally relevant, even for my kids. You know, they don't go around wearing necessarily a rugby shirt. They'll wear a basketball shirt. And that's the thing, you know, that's the bit that the NBA have worked very hard at keeping that cultural relevance through collaborations with cool people and with lifestyle and with other walks of life, not necessarily just strictly sport.
yeah, I mean, I've been impressed with what they've invested really well into the Chinese market, for example.
Yeah.
I spent maybe two months there making a documentary about rugby.
Okay.
And I just saw how big basketball was over there, but the NBA's been there for 30 years.
Sure. Actually, I read, if you guys are interested in it, have a check out. I think it was David Stern, who was the commissioner of the NBA at the time of the 92 Olympics in Barcelona, was the Dream Team, the US Dream Team, Michael Jordan and so on. That was a marketing mission. What is so amazing about that story is that they convinced the best basketball players in the world to enter the Olympics, the Dream Team. But that was to grow basketball globally. And from that point, now you have the European basketball leagues have grown in stature. China has grown unbelievably. They've now launched a league in Africa as well, because they want to be a global game. And they got a really, really good chance of being the global game, probably behind football. But rugby is also a global game. That's the thing we shouldn't beat ourselves up about. Like, we've got some really cool stuff happening in rugby. We're a bit quick to kind of focus on the negative when there's so much stuff to celebrate as well.
What's the biggest revenue drivers, and how does that split down for the URC from a league structure?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is true, I think, for most rugby competitions, that the vast majority of our revenue comes from media, then sponsorship, then ticketing, because we don't tend to be involved in the ticketing of day-to-day matches, week to week, sorry. Our involvement in the ticketing side of it is purely for the playoffs, for our final series. Same is true for Prem, and same is true for the top 14. They're involved with the semi-finals and finals. So it tends to break down like that. Media, sponsorship, ticketing revenue, and then basically everything else, which is licensing, largely brand licensing or data licensing. And that is percentage points. And it probably goes from around, 70, 80%, and it trickles down like that. Yeah, and sponsorship is very much a second to media.
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest sort of untapped revenue opportunity?
I think brand, actually sort of data licensing and brand. So on the data licensing side, as an example of what I mean, the NRL, Rugby League in Australia, makes a huge amount of money, over $50 million a year, from betting licensing. That is not sponsorship. That is them licensing the odds and the data around the odds to the bookies. So there's a huge revenue stream for rugby league that rugby union doesn't have. And if you look at the kind of business case of the NRL clubs in Australia, you're all going great guns and they're expanding. They're doing that largely off data licensing. So that's, for me, that's the one thing that rugby union doesn't have. It doesn't have a really good data licensing business. And that is a large, large area. If you can imagine, you talked about China there. There is a huge amount of betting on sport in Asia, and they're not betting on rugby. They're betting on other sports, and so other sports benefit from that, and rugby doesn't. I was at IMG when they really set that business up. It's now called Arena, which has now been sold, around tennis and golf. It became very, very large revenue streams for those two sports again. So I think that's one thing that rugby doesn't have currently. And then brand licensing. We're not very sort of developed from marketing and selling shirts with names on, for example. It's very recent. There are names on the back of shirts. It's very inconsistent. We're not very good. If you look at the NFL, that's a huge part of their business, is merchandising, licensing. So I think you get that when you're really coordinated businesses, and the NFL and the American sports are very, very centrally coordinated, and they hold quite a lot of rights centrally, whereas European sports those rights sit at the club level, not at the league level. When you can prove the case that actually it's better they're held centrally, you can create new revenue streams there. That's why we focused on the sort of three main ones. If we can start to show that they are creating extra revenue, then maybe you can start to invest behind some of those other revenue streams to help grow them. We're not quite there yet where we've got free revenue to do that, if you know what I mean.
Touching on America, what kind of changes and opportunities would you like to see in rugby? Would it be the addition of like an American franchise?
Yeah, so we were very close to that. We had a bit of a sliding doors moment where we chose to go down the South African route in 15, 16. I think for 17 when we went to Pro 14. Whereas the 2031 World Cup, World Rugby are now raised sort of $250, $260 million to invest in that market. That becomes really interesting, right? And we've just had Ireland play the All Blacks in Chicago to a sold out audience at Soldier Field. So that's, that to me, that shows that for our league, whilst we're sitting relatively small markets here, so not in England, but the rest of the UK and Ireland, they're still quite small markets from a people point of view, if you know what I mean, from a household point of view. We've got a lot of resonance in the States. There are a lot of people who consider themselves Irish in the States, So, and I think that creates an opportunity for us in certain markets on the East Coast that maybe we have that other leagues may not have. And so when we're looking for the next sort of iteration of growth, it'd be mad for us not to consider the States to some degree.
What's your thoughts on, obviously in football, they had the Ryan Reynolds come in and do the piece on Walsall. And more recently, we've seen the directors of Ozark and Ferrari looking at the idea of purchasing Cardiff Rugby and doing a similar sort of model. Do you think, I didn't mean to say Walsall, I meant Wrexham. Yeah, Wrexham. Yeah. Do you see, is there a rugby of Wrexham there, do you think?
It's a really interesting model because when I first heard about the Wrexham model, I said, how is that sustainable in the long run? But it clearly has been, it has worked to some certain degree. There are examples where I think it's Pierre Gasly owns Versailles in France. He's doing something similar, F1 driver. I think they work. I think they might. I would be a little bit cautious that that they might be a very short-term solution. You know what I mean? Whereas what we need is really strong foundational support of our franchises. I would never say no to them being involved. Do you know what I mean? I love that. I love them being involved. Whether you're relying on them or not is another thing. I think we can learn a lot from what they've done to market and promote Wrexham, which is extraordinary. But you can't necessarily rely on that interest being there for rugby, or if it is there for rugby, whether it will be there for the long run, which is what we need. We need long-term capital into these clubs. We need infrastructural growth. We need stadiums rebuilt. We need stands rebuilt in Cardiff. That takes serious money and serious commitment that you're not going to come in, make a TV program and leave. That's cool. That's great. And we kind of want that to happen. Whether that is enough to sort of secure the footing of our key franchises, I'm not sure. Yeah,
it's very open to debate.
Yeah.
What do you look for in a owner of a franchise when, let's say there was an American franchise? Would you look to maybe bring in one of the MLR teams, or would it be a completely new team?
There was something nice about somebody who knows how hard it is. And knows what the level is, because quite often someone will come into the sport, and we talk to new investors or new potential investors all the time, and they just don't know what the level is. It's very hard to tell. And when you've got a Leinster team out there with 13 Lions players playing, it's quite hard. It's a very high level. And I think that's the thing about having someone who's come in who knows the level. That's a positive. But someone needs to come in who really, really can fund it. I mean, that's what I mean. That's what I mean about sort of infrastructural investment. We need long-term capital in our clubs where somebody or a group is there for a very long time. They're not looking for a kind of quick win, turn around, sell. They've got to build stuff. They've got to help create a fan engagement strategy. They've got to create a fan experience strategy. They've got to put money down to develop stands and develop better lighting and all that stuff, which is not very sexy, but is what clubs need. We need to elevate the standards overall to encourage more people to come to the game, to have a great time and come back. That isn't a smash and grab. That is long-term capital. So I think it's a mix between somebody who knows how hard it is and somebody who's got the resources to sit there and fund it for a considerable long period of time. And they don't come around very often.
No.
So, that's why we're quite discerning with people who are interested in our league. Not least because not a lot of our clubs are actually privately owned. I mean, actually, let me think how many clubs are privately owned. The Welsh clubs are privately owned other than Cardiff. Benetton is privately owned. And that is Luciano Benetton. That is the owner of Benetton. That's the founder of Benetton, who's 80 odd years old, absolutely loves rugby. He had a Formula 1 team. He won the World Championship with Renault. He had a basketball team. He was in Serie A. He had a volleyball team. He was a Champions League volleyball team. All of those are gone. Rugby's stayed. And so it's people like that and his family that you will always, 9 times out of 10, take over somebody who's coming in to make a TV program. Yeah, because that's, it's where he lives. He lives in Treviso. He's committed to the town, the city. It's more than just the rugby club. It is about the community. And that's where sometimes it's difficult to get the right owner. It's the balance between somebody's really willing to invest and they realise it's a community asset. It's not a private plaything that they can buy and sell and do what they want and close it down if they get bored.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
If we circle back to talking a little bit more about you, Martin, you've had an absolutely remarkable career.
It's not over yet. Jeez.
Yeah, still ongoing.
I know I look old, but I'm not that old.
If you were to give anyone some advice on trying to get into the sports industry, what would you give them?
It's a really good point. Actually, I was talking this morning about an internship program that we're setting up with 10,000 interns. We've got a Women's Leadership Academy, which has got a kind of a internship program and work experience placement. I think taking any experience that you can get, like if I guess if you're lucky enough like me that you came through a professional route, I still at 18 years old knew what I wanted to do. And that's not to say that's what everybody needs to happen, but then I course corrected. Like I realized that I couldn't be a professional rugby player, but I still wanted to work in sport. I realized that I thought I wanted to be an agent, and I realized that was really hard. And I course corrected again, and I just kept on trying things. Go outside of your comfort zone, take on opportunity, but base it on fact. Right? Don't think you can do more than you can actually really do. Go and learn your subject matter, like you guys interviewing. Right? Go and learn your subject matter, really understand it, and then the conversation is more free flowing. The same is true in business. Like if you really, really understand and are interested in the subject matter, keep reading, keep having that thirst for knowledge, and then get the experience on top of it. And whatever happens next will be the right thing for you, I think. I believe in a little bit in fate. You're going to find your way as long as you're interested in it.
Yeah, definitely. And let's talk about this season a little bit. What's exciting you the most about this up and coming season?
It's really interesting. The table's so topsy-turvy, like we've never seen this before, really. Storm was going really strong. Munster going strong. So I think I like that. Well, last season we had 13 different teams that could qualify for race to the 8 in the last 3 rounds. So seeing that jeopardy is what we always wanted in the URC. We wanted it to be that sort of, I know I've talked a lot about the NFL, but any given Sunday mantra where any team can beat any team. We've seen Zebre win this season when you wouldn't have otherwise seen them win. So I want that. I want to see even more of that jeopardy going into the Christmas derby games. That's a great period for any club league. And then coming out, from the other side of Six Nations, I want to see people going at it. Every game matters. Every game counts. And just see where we get to. But it's already looking great. I mean, it's looking like we wouldn't have really scripted this table this way. And it means that the likes of Leinster and others are going to have to battle hard every single game. They're going to have to go out and win. Which, for when I think back to Pro 12 and Pro 14, was not always the case, right? So, URC has definitely thrown the league into a more competitive state than it was before, and long may that continue.
Definitely.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and I think the audience would have learnt a lot from you.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Martin.
Thank you.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.